A young orphan boy raised by cave-dwelling trash collectors tries to save his friends from an evil exterminator. This is my review of the Boxtrolls. The reason I want to see this movie was because it was a stop-motion animation, and you barely see those type of animations nowadays. And another reason I went to see it last month was because it was made by the same people who made Paranorman, which I saw 2 years ago. And it was made by the same people who made Coraline, which I haven't seen yet. And I can tell you guys that after seeing the movie with my dad, I can say that I thought the movie was alright. The good points. Definitely, for sure, the best thing about this movie is the animation. Because the animation is claymation mixed with some CGI animation, but it was just like a little slight mix, like there wasn't that much CGI animation. But when the CGI animation was used, it was mixed well with the claymation. And another reason I like this type of animation is that it's crazy how, like, the people who are behind this movie made everything from, like, scratch. They made the puppets, the clothing, the settings all from scratch. And overall, there wasn't really a moment during the animation where I thought, oh man, that was like a major bad thing that the animators didn't fix. But there are a few like smaller things that I'll talk about in the bad points later on. Surprisingly, the next thing I'll talk about is the sound design. And usually for anime movies, I don't really talk about the sound design. But the reason I'm talking about the sound design in this review is because the sound design didn't make me feel like I was in a scene. But I thought that this aspect did a good job at making these strange machines and these strange instruments that the Boxtrolls made sound realistic. Because once you see some of these machines and some of these like strange instruments, you'll think to yourself, oh, what does this sound like? And once you hear those sounds, you'll think to yourself, yeah, I guess that it would make that like unique, strange sound. The voice acting was good for the most part throughout the movie. Really, the only other good point I can say about this movie is that the overall story of the movie was written well, and some aspects of the characters and their background were written well too. The bad points. What I hated about this movie was that there was some writing with this one part of the movie, and with some of the characters that were written, that I thought to myself, that like either doesn't make sense, or it makes that character look really stupid. And I'll explain myself later on in the spoiler section. And there's just one scene of suspense that was written for the movie that was sort of predictable. And again, I'll explain that one as well in the spoiler section. Like I said before, I thought that the animation overall was fantastic, but I also said that there were some bad points to the animation. And those small bad points are that there are some instances throughout the movie where it seems like the animation like skipped over something for a split second. And when those several skips happened throughout the movie where it looked like either it seemed like they skipped over like a word of dialogue with the mouth movement or with the movement of the character when they're running or doing their like body movement, I'm wondering like, is there something wrong with the projector behind me, or was it like the filmmaker's fault? And that takes me out of the movie since I'm wondering like what's going on when I really should be focusing on the movie and what's happening on screen. And the only other bad point I can come up with is that there's some voice acting that could have been done better. Because there are several moments throughout the movie where I felt like the voice actors didn't do a good job at making it seem like that their voice was projecting either drama or horror or fear. Like I said, I saw some with my dad. My dad gives this movie a 3.25 out of 4 stars, while I give it a 2.75 out of 4 stars. I think you'll enjoy this movie if you're a huge fan of any type of animation, if you're a fan of the Paranorman or Coraline type of animation. I think kids and adults will enjoy this movie. I don't know about teenagers. Teenagers may think this movie is okay. Alright, spoilers for the Boxtrolls. If you haven't seen the Boxtrolls yet, and you still want to see it, then get out of here now! Because I'm spoiling some of the big plot points that happen in the movie, and if you know these plot points, then you'll be like, oh, well, like, this is gonna happen, and I don't need to watch a movie, when you really should watch a movie, since I think it's still an okay animated movie, and I still think that the animation is incredible. So, like I said, I hate this movie for some of the writing that I had. To start off, I'll say that the surprise with the father wasn't really that surprising. And it wasn't that surprising because we saw the father like when Eggs saw for the first time that all the trolls were alive, and then he saw this like crazy looking hairy old person like all chained up. And when we saw this chained up person for the first time, he was making these like crazy noises. And he also had this distinct like voice. So later on when there's this flashback, we see Eggs' father. And when I heard Eggs' father's voice, I was thinking to myself, yeah, that sounds like the person that was chained up before, so I'm guessing that's the father. And when they were trying to make a surprise later on, I was like, yeah, I already knew that. And I guess that they were trying to make it a surprise with the trolls not being dead. But when I saw the trolls that were imprisoned for the first time, I was like, yeah, I knew that something was going on there as well. Because the exterminator was an evil person, it seems like he was like doing something behind the scenes and not killing the trolls for his own purposes. And speaking of surprises, another surprise that they were trying to give us was when they were trying to make the audience think that the Boxtrolls died under that, like, whatever you call that, the flattener, I'll call it. And the reason I knew that the trolls weren't dead was because the trolls were an essential part of the entire movie. And the fact that there wasn't any blood or goo that came out of the boxes or, like, on the edges of the flattener when the flattener, like, went down on all of the boxes. And it wasn't really surprising because when the father said you did it, I was like, oh, like the trolls escaped somehow. So at this banquet, Eggs is trying to tell the mayor of the town about the evil plans of the exterminator. And Eggs puts all the cards on the table. He tells the plan about what the exterminator is trying to do. He shows that the lady that the mayor is sort of in love with is actually the exterminator, just in makeup and costume. But then it's like the mayor's like, oh no, like, oh, the cheese wheel's down there, and that, oh no, you like disrespected this woman even though he looks like the exterminator. It just made me feel like that this character, this father of the girl in this movie is really, really stupid and dumb. And I knew from the beginning of the movie that he was naive, but I didn't know that he was this naive. And it would seem like that any sensible person in this town would like realize that, oh, like the woman is actually the exterminator dressed up in makeup and a costume. I guess I was trying to play with one of the themes of the movie, but I was wishing that it did it in a different way. The only other spoiler I want to talk about is with the two henchmen. And these two henchmen think that what they're doing may be good or bad. Like throughout the movie, they're like debating between themselves if like what they're doing is morally good or morally bad. They're wondering if they're the heroes or the villains. And throughout the movie, I thought that they were just making a joke out of this because they knew that they were the villains. But no, at the end of the movie, when the final, like, sequence is happening, I guess they have some sort of an epiphany. And they realize that what they're doing is bad. And then I was wondering, well, why didn't they realize that, like, the first time that we were in the factory? Because if we remember, in the factory, the exterminator, like, lays out like all of his plans from the past and the present. And he says directly in front of the two henchmen that this boy where like all of the conflict like started from is alive and well. And it seems like these two people are smart, but it's like when the evidence is right in front of them, it's like they sort of don't get it or something. And that just sort of makes me mad because I like start to think like, wow, like those characters should have been written a little bit differently then. Or maybe they shouldn't have been in the presence of the exterminator so that they didn't hear the plan, so that later on they would be like, oh, like what we're doing is bad. So that's my review for the Boxtrolls. Hope you guys liked it. And other than that, guys, that's it.